Right, so I'm on my way here. I've come from France today. And on my way here, we've been involved in a story which is just breaking the truth, just published, and which is to be seen not there, but which has been written by one of Spinwatch's researchers called Hilary Aked, who's a fantastic researcher and who discovered just the other day this guy on television, Jonathan Sacerdoti, who's been on BBC News 4 or 5 times in the last couple of days defending Israel's actions in Gaza. And she saw this and she was outraged at what she heard, but she already knew who he was because we'd already noticed who he was on our website. And she quickly went into action and found all these clips online, which Jonathan had himself helpfully uploaded from the BBC, where he is described as a Middle East expert or as being involved in an apparently independent think tank which studies the Middle East. So he was on as an expert as defending Israel, as opposed to being on as a Zionist or a pro-Israeli propagandist, which is, strangely enough, what he actually is. 2 years ago, he was the Public Affairs Director for the Zionist Federation. He currently has a role with the Board of Deputies of British Jews, which is a pro-Zionist organisation, and he has all sorts of other connections with an organisation called Stand With Us, which is funded by the Israeli government, and various other organisations. Now, so this story is here out, and the part of the story is that the BBC are using a Zionist propagandist as if he is a neutral expert, which he's not. But the other part of the story, which I think is what interests me more about it, is that this is not just the BBC's fault. It is the BBC's fault, and people asked in the last session what you should do. Well, you should write and complain about it, because this is completely outrageous. But it's not just the BBC's fault, because people like Jonathan go to great lengths to persuade journalists that they are neutral experts who can be interviewed as neutral experts. So Jonathan, for example, made sure that his LinkedIn page here didn't mention his role with the Zionist Federation or the Board of Deputies or Stand With Us or any of the other activities. And so if a BBC journalist had checked this, they might just have seen that he was the director of the Institute for Middle Eastern Democracy, which sounds lovely, doesn't it? It's, of course, not really a proper institute. He's got him and 2 other guys. They've published 8 papers. They've once been quoted in the Jerusalem Post, and that's it. They had done a dossier denouncing the Palestine Solidarity campaign as homophobic and racist. So you can see what kind of thing they get up to. So Jonathan has not been entirely honest with the BBC, but has nevertheless been on the television quite regularly. Now, since this story was published, which I think was sometime this morning on New Left Project, all of the information and links in the story to all of his activities, these links have all gone dead. Because Jonathan has removed everything from the internet, including all the clips in the BBC. His LinkedIn profile is gone. All his photographs from Facebook, which were actually really strangely open this morning, are now closed and can't be accessed. But luckily enough, we've screen grabbed and downloaded the whole lot of them. So I just wanted and we'll be putting up more about this story later on New Left Project and on Spinwatch. I just wanted to raise that as an issue because I think it brings together the issues that you've been talking about the BBC and about bias, which I entirely sympathise with, but also I think one needs to recognise that in this particular example, it's not that the BBC is inherently Zionist, as someone said earlier on, or pro-Israeli. It takes some effort from Zionist and pro-Israel groups to make them pro-Zionist. Now, that effort obviously involves, to some extent, deception. And if you looked this morning, you can't anymore, Jonathan's Facebook page, you can see that he was quite amused with himself that he'd managed to get on the BBC so many times. And he puts up a wee thing yesterday saying, "Oh, BBC again at 7:30, think I'll have to move in there." One of his friends comes back and says, "Oh yes, I'm amazed that they're keeping having you back on the BBC." So it's that process of them trying to lobby and get onto the BBC and to mislead the viewers, and probably BBC journalists as well, is a process which needs close investigation. And it's close investigation which requires sometimes you to be nimble on your feet, because once they are discovered, they are quick with removing the evidence. So, and I think that's the kind of thing that Spinwatch does, is to investigate the organisations and individuals behind the news and how they operate. Now, Tim over there made a point in the last session that one needs to be very careful that one doesn't talk about secret Jewish conspiracies to overtake the media, and that is entirely correct. but the point I want to make here is that actually the way in which our society operates in relation to war, in relation to health, in relation to the financial crisis, the way in which our society operates is that increasingly there are institutions which provide and create information and news, which are then provided to the people in the country as if it's real news. And these are institutions which are largely funded by corporations or by rich individuals or foundations. And these are institutions and organisations like think tanks or policy planning groups, lobby organisations, which are quietly replacing institutions of genuine expertise. Now, people in the last session, they complained about academia and academics. And I noticed Rizwan complained about academics as well. It's a bad man. And he's quite right, and to complain about academics, and to, especially the orientation of academics towards the state. I started at the University of Bath, here's a small story, started at the University of Bath some 9 months ago, and I was at a research event within 2 months of starting in this hotel, and I walked up to the bar, and the guy there from one of the other departments there, and within 5 minutes of me starting to talk to him, he told me about the 6 months he'd spent on secondment at MI5. Recently. I tried to keep my jaw. So, do you really know who you're talking to? So, and that's one example, but there is systematic orientation of academics towards the state. But my point really is a broader one, which is that actually academia, for all its faults, is a place where real research can be done and facts can be found out. If academia and genuine institutions of expertise are replaced by fake institutions of expertise like think tanks or lobby groups, then we will be in a much worse place than we already are. An example like the current example of Sacerdote is one example, who comes from the kind of far right end of Zionism, but there are lots more which are more respectable, which are in the mainstream of conservatism, and I point you towards this report we did last year on the Centre for Social Cohesion and the Policy Exchange, two quite reasonably mainstream conservative think tanks, regarded not with the same disdain and disgust as we would regard the English Defence League or some of the counter-jihad or anti-Islamic activities taking place across the European continent. But these are organisations which are funded by large corporations, by rich foundations, by rich individuals, and their function is to populate the information environment in our society with information which makes it look like there's a real threat from Islam, and it's not just the threat of terrorism, which Rizwan was talking about a minute ago, but it's a threat of actually overtaking our culture. And so that the stuff that these people produce, there's the notion that we will be outbred by Muslims by 2050, that actually Sharia law is already progressing through the local councils and local communities throughout the UK, and that there's a genuine threat against what is it they call it? Western values. I love it when Michael Gove talks about Western values, and one remembers what Western values mean in Iraq and Afghanistan as people die without being seen. These think tanks are there to populate the information environment, to make it seem as if there is a genuine threat from Islam, that it is Islam and not people who are engaged in political violence or terrorism, which is a threat. And it allows and conditions the public policy arena to take more and more harsh decisions. It doesn't necessarily convince us or the public more generally, but it allows people in positions of power to engage in more and more interventions on civil liberties, to keep students under surveillance, to ensure that people can get put away into prison, as Rizwan nearly did, for having done nothing more than going onto the internet and trying to find the truth about how the world is operating. So I want to suggest to you that when we talk about Gaza, or we talk about the interventions in Libya, when we talk about a war all around the world, that it's not just the media we should look at, we should also look at those organisations and individuals which are there trying to manage the policy process behind the scenes. And to find out about them, you can research them. These organisations are not impossible to research. You can research them and expose them. And when you expose them, quite often you can get a reaction. As Jonathan has spent most of the day today scrubbing the internet in the vain hope that we haven't screen grabbed it all. So I think the point I want to make is that it's like Rizwan's point, that there is hope that we can do things which can actually put them on the defensive and expose them for what they're doing. Okay.